Good morning, YouTubers. It's about 10:30. So this brings us back, or brings us to the end of this amazing horror odyssey that's been Friday 13th. I've covered all the movies, and today is going to be the topic of this bad boy right here, Friday the 13th, the Killer Cut, the Blu-ray version, and it came out in 2009. This was the last movie that came out. And the thing that started this whole show was the recent announcement that there's going to be additional movies coming out in the franchise. And that, as you know, and I've talked a lot about before, the Victor Lewis and Sean Cunningham, the creators of the film, have been basically involved in a multi billion-dollar lawsuit about creative rights, and the case was announced that it's over, and I guess there was a settlement, and it was announced through Sean Cunningham that there's going to be more films coming out. So it's pretty exciting. So that spurred this whole idea of doing a show all about Friday 13th. I started off doing all of the eight movies that I have in my box set, and it's been, and then the four or five additional ones that are spin-offs or that are still part of it but not a part of the box set. And there's been some great surprises. There are certain movies that stood out that were really surprisingly good, and probably the biggest one was part five, Jason Lives. For some reason, that was the only movie I saw as a kid, Friday the 13th movie I saw as a kid in the theater. Never saw any of the other ones, and I had not seen that one a whole bunch of times compared to, say, like chapter four, the final chapter, or part four, the final chapter, which I've seen like an ungodly amount of times. And watching that again, and especially in succession of the timeline, uh, found that movie to be super awesome. I really love that movie. I think it's one of the best ones. It's definitely on the top of my list now. And then the other one, which is probably shocking to say to a degree, just because of how terrible it is in a lot of ways, is Jason X. I really like that movie. It's so bad. It's probably technically the worst one, just because it was right in the age, or right at the emergence of where computers were starting to be used, and so there's basically, it was one of the first films where they used like early CGI, and the CGI is like horrendous and it's awful. And no, basically 90% of the movie is all of these like really bad computer graphics, and so it feels like like a bad video game. Like, I feel like the first version of like Donkey Kong or Pac-Man is probably better, but I don't know. In some weird way, it adds to the charm of the film, and I like that it's something totally different. That Jason is like in outer space, which is totally bonkers just thinking of that. And it takes him out of the normal universe completely, and there's a lot of like virtual reality in it, and it's again, it's terrible, but there's some things about it that I thought were kind of interesting and things you would never see before. And yeah, I really like that movie, and I'm craving to watch that again too, which is so weird. And especially Jason Lives, which is like a really great movie. So it's been a great surprise watching them all in succession and seeing how the whole storyline kind of plays together, the level of fun and enjoyment that these movies I feel like provide me, and then also people who are hardcore fans of the series and the franchise. It's a great thing of pure escapism. And I'm a huge fan of slasher films, and in a lot of ways, this really kicked off the genre that became known as the American, slasher uh, craze that started in the '80s, because the first one was such a huge movie. Tons of, thousands of movies came out afterwards. A lot of American films, and then also a lot of, you know, European films. And it was just this huge craze and just an amazing period for this real, like these really decadent, trashy slasher movies that came out that I just love. So this movie really, or this franchise really, I felt was in some ways well, in some ways, almost solely responsible for that. And I cover a lot of slash movies and grindhouse movies, and this movie was a real pivotal. This franchise was a real pivotal thing and influence on taking these films that were that are normally super low budget and underground, and suddenly they became commercial success. So because of that commercial success, all these other filmmakers tried to kind of capitalize on that market, which they did. Some were obviously way more successful than others, but it just spurred this amazing period in cinema. So so this one came out 2009, and it's awesome. I remember seeing it when it came out. Shortly after, probably like 2010 or so, I saw it, and it came out 2009. Like I said, it was directed by Marcus Nispel, who's probably most well known for. He also did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, which was a big box office hit, and that's a movie I'd like to see again. I'm not really sure how I thought about that film. I remember it being okay, but it's something I want to see again, and I'll probably do a show or something about that. I did a big show on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a lot of fun. So, but as a franchise, or like particularly as a horror franchise, the Friday 13th is definitely my favorite. Not only are there so many movies, there's like 14 movies, but I just think they're super fun. I just think they're part of it is like nostalgic reasons as a kid growing up watching these movies on cable and VHS. But they're just, to me, being such a fan of horror and the slasher genre, it's kind of like the ultimate level, like the highest level of like pure escapism. And just great, just great. And this Blu-ray version of this film is pretty amazing. It's got some really great special features. The transfer of it to Blu-ray with the remastering of the video, the visual, and also the audio is really great, really impressive. And the other thing that's funny about this film is it's a Michael Bay production. If you know who Michael Bay is, or maybe you don't, he's like a big Hollywood, titan. Basically, he was responsible for like all the Transformer movies that have come out. He was responsible for Armageddon with Ben Affleck and Bruce Willis. He was responsible for Con Air, also Independence Day with Will Smith. Just these like giant, like super bloated Hollywood action movies. Basically, he was responsible for them, where they have so much money pumped into them, and they're just so like over the top. I like some of those movies actually, and I think they can be fun, but they're so extreme in their weird nature of where there's so much money thrown at these movies, and they tend to be like these huge box office monsters. So it was interesting that he got behind this tiny little super low budget slasher film, or slasher franchise that are typically like really super uber low budget. They're really gritty and kind of dirty and basically shot on a shoestring budget. So it's interesting that he got behind this, and I thought, well, okay, it's not going to be that great because maybe it's going to be too glossed over, too maybe the violence will be toned down, and it's going to lose like one of the things I love about this movie, this whole entire franchise. So whatever movie it is, they all have this like independent kind of filmmaker vibe about it, and they're all like really low budget, and they're really kind of gritty and raw. Even though they're campy and silly, they're still gritty and raw and kind of nasty. And there's all like a lot of cool in camera effects, you know, especially around the legendary Tom Savini. So they just have that rawness, and I was like, well, if they're going to suddenly have this millions and millions and millions of dollars thrown behind it, is it going to lose? It's going to lose that kind of rawness to it. But surprisingly, with this movie, I think even though the production value is like through the roof, it still has that rawness. It still retains the rawness of the earlier films, particularly part 2 through 4. I feel like those are my favorite films, and it really has that kind of grittiness to it, even though it's like kind of over bloated, and it's a cool balance. Um, Derek Mears plays Jason Voorhees, who I think is just spectacular in this. And I've seen some interviews with him where he talks about his influences and people who he kind of modeled his version of Jason Voorhees after. And he was talking a lot about Ted White, who played Jason in the final chapter, which remains as my favorite. That remains my favorite film in the franchise. I look at that as being like the Empire Strikes Back of the franchise. Just amazing. Such an imposing and menacing character in that film. And then he also said that he modeled it off of Tarzan, which I thought was interesting, and then also Rambo from First Blood, and I thought that's really cool. Like that's an interesting, different angle, where he kind of creates this character Jason Voorhees, where he's like this like quintessential loner, but he's like a survivalist, and he, not only is he physically really frightening and imposing, he's also very smart and clever, and he knows how to figure things out, and he's got this level of intelligence that you've never really seen before, and he's kind of this like giant alpha male of the jungle. He's like this apex predator, and I feel like Derek Mears really portrayed him as that, and it's great. He's I think he's one of the best Jasons. He's super intense, and yeah, it's a great conclusion to the series. And again, there's going to be more movies coming out. It's super gory too, which I love. It's really nasty. It's really down and dirty at times. There's some great kills. I like too that it really ties in heavily part two and part four, which are some of my favorite movies in the franchise. But yet it does something new. It does something different. It has some interesting twists to it, so it's not a total ripoff. And I feel like this movie is kind of unique in a way. I feel like it's its own thing. I kind of think somebody who has never seen a Friday the 13th movie could watch this and get the gist of it and probably really enjoy it if they like horror films. It's kind of its own standalone thing, and I thought they did a good job, doing that. So you didn't need to see all 12 or 13 other movies to understand what the heck's going on, but I think they did a good job with like kind of giving you enough backstory and kind of taking on that ride. It's a little bit of an origins tale too about Jason, which is cool, but it's not too like bloated as far as that thing goes. It like delivers the goods. But fantastic movie, and thanks again for everybody's support. This has been a blast doing this series and launching this YouTube channel. Got some big things hopefully coming up soon. Well, I have an interview that's going to be happening, not for about probably a month or so, but I actually have an interview landed with an actress who was in one of these movies, who was in one of the original Friday 13th movies. So that's going to be really fascinating and really interesting. I'm going to do an interview with her and then upload it to the channel, so you'll see that soon. Stay tuned for when that's going to be happening. I'm going to do a bunch of press around that. So thank you again. If you get a chance, like and subscribe to my page. I really appreciate the support. This is Jason Dean. This has been a hell of a ride doing all these movies, and we'll see you next time. Peace.